Welcome to another episode of Automotive Heaven. We're at the Auburn, Court, and Duesenberg Museum. We're here with an old friend of ours from, if you listen to my radio shows, I had Sam Grate on about 3 years ago or so. You were on my show. And let me tell you something, folks. I got a lot of comments about Sam.
Yes, that's good.
You were very knowledgeable, and they loved your style of just telling about the cars and this and that. So when I called to see if I can come up here and do some shows, I asked for you. I wanted to have you back on. Tell us about the display we're in right now. Sam's going to go through the museum with us today and give us some of his knowledge of these wonderful automobiles.
Yeah, so right now we're standing in the gallery of Indiana-built automobiles, and right behind us here is an Apperson automobile. With Apperson, it started off as Haynes Apperson with Elwood Haynes and Edgar Apperson. They created some of the very earliest cars, and right here in Indiana, and they worked together for about 3 or 4 years or so, creating early cars, and then they split and went their separate directions. Elwood Haynes started his own company and called it the Haynes, and Edgar Apperson started his own company and called it the Apperson. So this section of our Indiana gallery here, we have a Haynes Apperson, one of the very early cars, and then an example of a Haynes and of an Apperson.
Now, they didn't last long, correct?
Correct. Both Haynes and Apperson did not make it through the Great Depression era.
Oh, so they did last, what, about 10 years or so? That's kind of a long period of time.
Almost about 30 years.
30 years they lasted?
Almost, yeah.
Wow.
Yep.
So they were, because I know in Indiana they built a lot of cars. We're going to go by that wall where it shows all the different manufacturers in Auburn, not in Auburn, but in Indiana. But this is kind of a cool story. They lasted 30 years. 1930 Packard 745 convertible. I've loved Packards since I was a little kid. The style, the elegance, the beauty of the Packard automobile. This is called the Victorian body style, and it's restored to a marvelous shape. I love what they did with this car here at the museum, putting it here. Sam, these cars from the era here, the teens, I believe this one is, they all basically were the same kind of concept, correct?
Yeah, so this car here that we're standing in front of is a 1916 Westcott, and that was made in Richmond, Indiana. And it's one of what we call the assembled makes, in that they took parts from other different companies, other different corporations that were making car parts, and just assembled them into one working car. So this Westcott here is an example of one of those assembled makes.
You know, I was going to get into it with this story, but since you mentioned it now, I'm telling you, this guy really is knowledgeable. He knows. But there was, I believe, there was like 496 auto manufacturers in the state of Indiana back in the day.
That's correct, yeah. Between the 1900s, 10s, 20s, into the 30s, there were almost up to 500 individual car manufacturers.
Now, what you're saying, I've been telling this story for many years. What you just said was a lot of people had money. Mm-hmm. They had $10,000. Let's just use a figure, okay? So they would take their $10,000 and buy parts from different manufacturers, this and that, and they would assemble a car with different parts from different places, right, different drivetrains and all the other stuff, and put their name on the car, correct?
Correct.
Now, this one is real interesting, folks, because I love coming to a place like this because of the things you'll see. Now, the paint, now this has been restored.
Correct.
But the paint on this is kind of got like a dullness to it, and that's what originally would have been on a car like this. They weren't pristine, shined and polished to the brightest that we know today.
Right.
They had like and whoever restored this wanted to go with authenticity and had whoever did the paint job do that to make it look original.
Right, and not every car came out as like 100-point concourse quality. This paint kind of has like a matte, kind of a subdued finish to it. It still has a shine, but it's very reserved, I would call it.
You know, you bring up another point. I'm going to go in with you on this one because people think, oh, I got a car this day. They say, I saw one go through the auction and mine's worth, you know, whatever. But the concourse cars that you're talking about, 100 points and this and that, that's like, what, this much percent of cars that are actually really restored will come into a 100 point?
Right.
So
they're very, very rare.
Very, very rare.
Very rare.
And restoring a car and just enjoying it, this and that, you're better off doing something like that than you are trying to make it a 100-point concourse car. Now, do you have this? You're bringing up a great point here. Do you have any 100-point cars here at the museum?
We do, and they've been donated in that fashion. As the museum, when we participate in concourse, we don't go for judging or anything like that. We just go to share the car, share the history, share the museum, and just to get our cars out into the public beyond just the museum building itself.
Concept cars have been around since the beginning of the automobile industry for car shows and that. Now here's a vehicle that they ended up designing completely around what an airplane does and how it looks. I believe this was one of the first years with the T-tops, the glass T-tops built in. But everything, even the dashboard has levers like you have in an airplane, not like you have in a car. And if you look at everything with this car, it's designed completely from the airplane industry, the aircraft industry. 1936 Auburn Hearst, an 852 model. Now Auburn, this was a year before they closed the doors, they went out of business, but they actually built a lot of these Hearsts, ambulances, and limousines. This thing is, I love the old days of vehicles like this. I mean, this was really an amazing vehicle, to say the least. 1948 Lincoln Continental. I want to mention one thing about this. This whole body style and this theme with this vehicle was designed, a key person that was in designing this vehicle and working with putting this vehicle together for the Ford Motor Company was Edsel Ford. He passed away before this one came out, but it's just the whole body style. The back end of it we can't shoot because it's real tight back here and real dark, but he's got the Continental kit on the back where he's got the spare tire, but it's a very unique body style. You don't see any of this. It's, I want to say it's plain, but it's elegant. It's Lincoln. And what else can I say about this vehicle? Gorgeous 1948 Lincoln Continental. I know we're in Indiana, but the guy that made the Biograph Theater famous was John Dillinger. And here they have a display of the Dillinger story, but also Dillinger was from Indiana. But we have the original Thompson submachine gun that John Dillinger stole from the police departments and used in his crime spree. Another interesting point about Dillinger is he actually wrote a letter to Henry Ford stating that when he stole vehicles, he stole Ford V8 vehicles because those vehicles he could always run away from the police. And we have a display of that on the other side. Tour Chicago with Richie Z. Personal and private tours, 2 people, 4 people, or 6 people. A tour of Chicago you'll never forget. Chicago is our inspiration. The Mag Mile, Museum Campus, Historic Chicago, Theater District, Millennium Park, Water Tower, Art Institute, and so much more. Call Richie Z at 312-841-2333. Our website is at www.richizie.com. We're also on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube at Richie Z. GoFundMe page. Very important that we get funding for projects like this. We also do historic presentations of Chicago on Zoom. So tune in at richiez.com. 1952 Crosley. Number one, the car is unique. It's really sought after. These little cars are really sought after. But if you get a car like this particular car here, you really have something special, because everybody's heard of the architect in Chicago, Frank Lloyd Wright. Well, he was from Chicago, but he did architecture all over the world. And this was Frank Lloyd Wright's personal vehicle. Interesting question I had earlier today from my cameraman Tim Alway goes, was Frank Lloyd Wright a small man? Because it's very small in here. Well, when you think about it, back in the day, up until probably the 70s, people were small, and they could fit in and out of cars like this. So, but it's really something to see a car like this, and it was owned by Frank Lloyd Wright.
So what we have right here is a 1932 Studebaker Four Seasons Roadster. The Studebaker president, such as seen here, is Studebaker's first foray into the high-end, high-value classic car market. The Four Seasons Roadster here is a very rare example, one of about only 4 left in existence. And it's a straight 8 engine, fine motor car, fine running condition, and perhaps one of the favorites here at the museum.
1915 Studebaker Model SD. But what I want to talk about is the Studebaker Museum in South Bend, Indiana, because Tim Alway and I went out there a few months ago, and we shot 4 television shows there. So we did some stuff. No, we shot 1 television show at the Studebaker Museum. And the history of Studebaker is just amazing. They started out way before the automobile industry was around. They were building farm equipment. They started out building stagecoaches for all the presidents and things like that. And then they went into manufacturing cars. In Indiana, South Bend, Indiana. The Studebaker company, though, they made great cars from the very beginning. It was a really innovative company. When people in the 50s, when gas was a quarter a gallon, 25 cents a gallon, they were making efficient cars, 6-cylinder cars or 1-barrel carburetors. It's really an interesting company. Like I say, you can go on our website, what I'm plugging right now, folks. You can go on our website, richiez.com, richieze.com, or you can go to YouTube and punch in Richie Z, and you'll see 10 television shows from car museums. We're doing Auburn, and Duesenberg now. We're probably going to have 2 or 3 shows from here also on the site. So kind of becoming the person that's known for doing car museums. Somebody called me, they actually messaged me on Facebook. I'm on Facebook also, and these shows show up on Facebook. They called me the museum king of the auto industry, so it was kind of cool. It was, I liked that comment. You know, I did the history of Stutz, and I did it probably 20 some odd years ago on one of my radio shows. I have a book at home that I haven't opened probably in 20 years. I remember some things, but man, tell us about the history of this car. I mean, this car, when you mention that name, people know what it is.
Right, Stutz is one of Indiana's most well-known makes. They were very well known in the racing world for their low production but very high quality, very powerful automobiles. And this Speedway 4 right here, for example, is one of those as well. Features a 4-cylinder engine, has a horsepower of around 90 horsepower, putting it on par or even better with Duesenberg of that day. And it's got a T-head engine, one of the very last years that they used that type of engine. And it's very much, when you sit in it, when you look at it, it's very much has its racing pedigree built into the passenger car.
How long did they manufacture automobiles?
Stutz lasted into the mid-30s, and then they were wiped out like many with the Great Depression.
Many were wiped out with the Great Depression, right?
Yeah, the vast majority in Indiana were wiped out by the Great Depression. Not more than just a dozen or so made it to World War II.
1925 Miller, Junior 8. Now, Miller was a racing family that built race cars, strictly race cars. But this car is very unique in that it has front-wheel drive. This is the first automobile with front-wheel drive. And then Cord saw this vehicle on the racetrack. Everybody was like into the racing industry at the time. Cord actually saw this vehicle on the racetrack, and by 1929, he was the first one to put front-wheel drive on the Cord automobiles. So, got his idea from the Miller Racing Team in 1925. By 1929, Cord was building front-wheel drive automobiles. You know, Sam, before we get started, I gotta say something. You know, we got a 1910 Auburn. It's from the racing era. A lot of these manufacturers were very big into racing, and it helped sell their vehicles. But I'm gonna fill you guys in on something when you come to a museum, especially like this. I love the work that you guys do with the displays here. This whole display that you have of the vehicle not only helps the vehicle, but it tells the story. If you look at the back wall, and if you look at all the stuff that's on the posters, we don't put up print. It's a television show. You want to see stuff coming down,
right,
visit the museum. But this is actually pictures of a vehicle like this that was used in the racing industry back in the 20s, correct?
Right. One of the very early things that the early automobiles needed to do was to prove that they were reliable, prove that they were efficient, and prove that they had speed beyond what a traditional horse and buggy could provide. So a lot of early manufacturers, such as Auburn, would take their stock cars, such as this, and take them to places like the Oklahoma State Fairgrounds, where they would race in short track, short circuit laps and distances to show, hey, our car is fast, we average this speed, you could buy this car, it is reliable, and this is why, and this is our proof.
Let me ask you one question about this. I don't know if you'll know this one or not, but back then, did they modify these vehicles for racing?
They did. This was before big sanctioning bodies like AAA. What they would do, like you can see in the picture behind us here, was they would take off all the extra seats, they would take off all the extra fenders and running boards and such, and kind of lighten them up, and that was standard back then. And with the Oklahoma State Fairgrounds, for example, that was the condition it raced in against other makes like Stutz and Marmon, for example.
No seat belts, and they took off the running boards and fenders and stuff like that, so they made you closer into like
Yes.
on the racetrack, right?
Yep.
It is comical, but
Right.
it's part of the history. It's the story. You know, they made it lighter so that would make it go faster.
Exactly. Auburn here in 1910, Oklahoma State Fairgrounds averaged 42 miles per hour.
You know, I asked you a very simple question in the earlier segment here, and I never even seen these cars yet. I didn't take a close look at them, but the one we're looking at right now, tell us about the innovations they have for the racing industry there.
Right, so not only were they racing stock cars or specific cars for places like the Indianapolis 500 that had strict engine displacement and rules, there was also sprint cars such as the one we're looking at right here. Sprint cars were also very innovative in that they were one of the type of race cars that led the way to more innovation, more safety factors, helping to further the racing scene in ways other than just with stock cars or with very specific rule-oriented cars.
Now this boat tail speedster, man, this thing is like dressed to the hilt with a lot of options in that, but this was from the racing era, correct?
Right, so this one was owned by Sam Collier from New York, and he took it to a lot of European tracks and other places around the world, and stock Auburn V12 boat tail speedster, raced it in these tracks all over the world, and it also helped prove that these cars were among the very best, the very fastest, and something that you could just buy, take it to your own track if you wanted to, get it out on the road and just enjoy driving.
But that was a key factor back in the day of vehicles of horsepower, and it kind of went hand in hand with reliability. You knew the car, if it could go on the track and do what it could do out there and not overheat and on and on and on, you know that was a dependable vehicle.
That was a vehicle you could rely upon every day.
Okay, and let's touch on, we're coming back into my era. I think this is probably from the 60s?
Yeah, this is a 1960s dragster.
Okay.
So with this gallery and with Museum too, we want to show how not only did innovations from 1910, 20s, and 30s, how that transferred over into more modern era. So with the dragster, with an Indianapolis race car, just show how racing evolved from very primitive, very dangerous, very unsafe really, into something that goes more with speed, a lot more safety factors today, and just how much improved these cars became.
You mentioned the word primitive, and this vehicle here to me is very primitive because I've been on the track now and I really enjoy the fuel funny cars that go from 0 to 250 miles an hour in 5 seconds.
Right.
So, and this is like a dinosaur compared to what's going on today. So the next time I come to this museum, you're going to have one.
Oh, sure. Yeah, we should get the owner here and have him start it up, and you'll have about hearing loss for 2 or 3 days. So let me take you here. We were just talking about the 60s dragster. Now here with a 2003 Indy car. Just shows how much refinement in terms of aerodynamics, how low to the ground it is, these big wheels that stick to the racetrack when they get hot. And this is one that we actually allow visitors, when we're not restricted with COVID-19, to get inside, climb into the dragster here, and just sit in it and steer it and just see how it is as a race car driver in one of these Indy cars, to just sit so low to the ground and see what the views they see when in their car, how they're racing, how the car handles, just a view that otherwise you would never be able to see.
You know, I was serious when we were by the other car, and I didn't see, you know, this whole display. We just came in and started shooting stuff and talking about stuff. And then when you said, oh, you know, but folks, this is what I love about a place like this. And you have, like you're saying, from 1910, I think we started,
right, through
the 20s, 30s, 60s, and now we're taking you to 2000, 2003, 4, whatever it is.
Right.
You know, this tells the whole story, and I love hearing and seeing the whole story. Special thanks to the Auburn Court and Duesenberg Automobile Museum. Museum Curator Sam Grate, Executive Producer and Host Richie Z, Cameraman Timothy Alway, Post-Production and Editing Zoe Laird. Visit us at YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook at RICHIEZIE. Call me direct at 312-841-2560. Go to our website at www.richisradio.com. RICHIEZIE.com. GoFundMe at Richie Z. It's very important that we get funding for programming like this.